It's not just younger Australians seeking assistance to break into the housing market. Fresh data shows buyers up to the age of 59 are signing up to the federal government's First Home Loan Deposit Scheme. The scheme, announced last year, enables first home buyers to get into the market with as little as a 5% deposit without having to pay lenders' mortgage insurance. While most of the applicants to date are aged between 25 and 29, at least 11% of those who've applied are aged between 40 and 59. More than 5,700 Australians have taken up the offer of assistance. Let's go live now to the Housing Minister, Michael Sukkar. Thank you for your time. How many people have taken up this scheme, and are you regarding this as a success so far?
Well, good morning, Laura. Great to be with you. Look, at this stage there, at last count, about 6,500 people who are at some point of the process in either getting pre-approval, securing a guarantee, or in some cases having already settled on a property. So it's been extremely encouraging to see the uptake from first home buyers with the First Home Loan Deposit Scheme. As you said, this scheme enables people to get into the market with a 5% deposit because one of the things that we found, certainly in recent times, has been banks requiring a 20% deposit has been really one of the major challenges for people to purchase their first home. So by providing a government guarantee, enabling them to get into the market with a 5% deposit, we're bringing that purchase forward in some case by many years, and it's been encouraging to see first home buyers really availing themselves of the First Home Loan Deposit Scheme. And this is, I suppose, Laura, a sign that, as I said in Parliament last week, a recovery in the Australian housing market that is pleasingly being led by first home buyers.
Yeah, we've seen that those applicants and those numbers this morning from this data, but half the applicants are planning to go outside the capital cities, as you say. Why is that?
Well, we designed it deliberately, Laura, that it wouldn't be just a Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane centric scheme. This could be very easily a type of scheme that gets used just in our major capital cities, but we want to assist people purchasing a home wherever they'd like, whether it be a regional centre, whether it be a rural area. That's why we have price caps that are set differently throughout the country that reflect the local market. Yep. We think it's very encouraging, and you know, there is about half in our major capital cities, the other half outside. If someone had told me that when we pressed the button on the scheme on the 1st of January, I would have been very pleased.
But doesn't this just highlight the problem that people are going outside the capital cities, because this is a program that's capped at $700,000 and there simply isn't the stock at that price in the city?
Well, no, there's a lot of stock in the cities at that price, although, Laura, for example, if you look at Sydney with a house price cap of $700,000, you're no doubt looking at a fairly modest first home. There's absolutely no doubt about it. You're looking at potentially an apartment or another detached dwelling, or sometimes a semi-detached dwelling. So this has been designed for that modest first home. And I'll be happy to one day take you through it, Laura, there is stock throughout Sydney within those price caps. But of course they are at that more modest level of first home buyers.
Part of this scheme, 11% of those taking up the scheme are aged over 40, between 40 and 59. Does it concern you that people are in their 40s and 50s only for the first time looking at buying their first home?
Well, Laura, I wouldn't say concerned. I must say it was not a statistic that, again, I was expecting. We set up the First Home Loan Deposit Scheme, and I think, like many Australians, your mind does turn to that stereotypical young first home buyer. But again, if somebody had have said to me when we put this scheme together that it would help people who perhaps a little bit later are getting into the housing market for the first time, I would have been very pleased. We know amongst those 11% of people above 40, you know, we have single women who are getting into the housing market for the first time. I actually think it's a wonderful part of the story of the First Home Loan Deposit Scheme, and as you and all of your viewers will know, in this day and age with housing prices where they are, perhaps it's not as surprising as some might obviously think, with people having struggled to get into the housing market earlier.
Just a few other things around today. You may have noticed that your state counterpart, indeed the Treasurer of New South Wales, has taken a bit of a swipe, or is due to take a bit of a swipe in a speech this morning at you as being part of the Canberra team, saying that there's a Canberra comatosis, there's a lack of visionary leadership because of a revolving door of Prime Ministers, and essentially it has led to the Henry Review gathering dust, and that you're not doing too much to boost Labor productivity. What do you have to say to that?
Well, I'd say as far as reform goes, the Morrison government, as our first act after the election, delivered the most significant personal income tax reforms that this country has seen in a generation. I mean, that is our record of serious, hard tax reform, and we saw certainly in the last quarter of last year how that fed into private consumption. So I would quite happily put up our record of tax reform against anybody, any state or territory, and I think it's healthy to have these discussions. I don't think there's anything wrong with all of us encouraging each other, provided that every government that's sovereign in its own right is undertaking reforms, and if you're going to preach about reform, I suppose you've got to live up to that. And I think as a government we certainly have, and no doubt the New South Wales Treasurer will live up to that as well.
Is there no truth to what he's been saying though?
Well, I've just pointed to the record. I mean, Laura, we have reformed personal income tax in a way that I think few thought was possible. We've removed an entire tax bracket. This is reform that we've not seen for a generation. That is our record, and I would happily put our record of tax reform particularly up against any government in recent times.
All right, let's talk about climate change and emissions reduction. Zero net emissions by 2050. Is this something that your government can commit to?
Well, what we've committed to, Laura, as you well know, is that we will meet our Paris commitments of a 26% reduction by 2030. That is what we've committed to. That's what's on the table. And I remember being a fresh-faced candidate about 7 or 8 years ago, Laura, and if we had have taken to the 2013 election those sorts of ambitious reduction targets, I think it would have almost pleased everybody across the board. But naturally, people's expectations increase over time. This is an ambitious set of reductions. We've committed to it. We're going
Some of your colleagues believe a net zero emissions target, which is an aspiration for the New South Wales government and other states right around this country, 80 other countries around the world, is achievable. But some of your colleagues, like John Barilaro, thinks that that kind of target would see an end to agriculture. Is that right? Is that your view of things?
Well, Laura, I think there's a kaleidoscope of views in the Liberal Party on virtually every issue. You
What's
understand
your view,
that. We have a party room that determines what policy is. My view is the party's view, and that is that we should meet the commitments that we've signed up for. Australia as a country, we are a trusted partner, and when we sign up to do something, we do it. It's not just a symbolic gesture. It's not just an aspiration. We actually deliver it.
But isn't it true that part of Paris is looking at this longer-term target of 2050? So, I mean, perhaps we need to go back and look at what was signed up to under the previous governments, and maybe there was a commitment, a target in there anyway to look at 2050 and zero net emissions. That is part of the whole apparatus of Paris, isn't it?
Well, Laura, I mean, people are entitled to have their views and have those discussions. In the end, though, what we do as a party is we form a policy that takes into account all of the views and what is achievable and what is desirable from an economic perspective, what is desirable from an environmental perspective, and then we come out and we commit to something and we deliver it. And I suppose what I'm saying to you is my focus, and I think the government's focus quite rightly, is to meet the commitments that we have met, and there's nothing wrong with further discussions as far as ambitions into the future, but of course it's always got to be within the framework of what we have promised the Australian people. We've promised the Australian people that we will ensure that we have secure, stable and effective electricity system, that we would meet our Paris commitments, and that's what we've got to do.
Michael Sukkar, great to have you on the program. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura.